cartoon fanatics, and welcome to the first live-action cartoon corner I've done. I know, what is this? I'm not in 2D. What madness is going on? It mostly has to do with the fact I was trying to crank out this review the way I normally make cartoon corners, and I've been having a lot of issues staring at the screen for the past week. So with that being said, we're going to do something a little bit different. If you're new here, you can just ignore everything I just said. And since we're talking about Amphibia today, what's more appropriate than discussing the main theme of Amphibia, which is change? So for this cartoon corner, we're going to discuss the second half of season 3 of Amphibia, leading all the way up to the series finale. I'll just go over the brief plot sections, the highlights that I enjoyed, some things I still kind of wish happened in the show, and what the end of Amphibia means for things changing. This is very hot. Ooh, hot. It's very good though. Has anyone ever mixed green tea and chamomile tea together? Highly recommend it. So the last cartoon corner I discussed the first half of season 3, which is most of the episodes of Anne and the Planters' time in the human world. Kind of more slice of life episodes happening there as they got introduced to new human characters, lots of things going on with Anne and her parents. We got introduced to secret government stuff trying to catch them. They met some scientists and some robot girlfriends that helped them build the portal machine along the way. So now, at the beginning of the second half, we're kind of at the whole accumulation of that first half of the season, which was building the portal to get back to Amphibia. And thankfully, they are successful, just getting back to Amphibia in the nick of time before Mr. X and his government team can catch them, which leaves Anne's parents, the scientists, and all of the rest of the humans in the human world basically on their own again, just hoping the invasion is stopped. We'll get back to that, put a pin in it. And once we get back to Amphibia, we see that things have drastically changed as Andreas is going through his plan of conquering Earth. He's basically blatantly disregarded trying to be a kind and benevolent ruler to the residents of Amphibia. It's very much like an apocalyptic / fantasy war zone type scenario now. And we do have Anne and Sasha reconnecting along with the residents of Wartwood, which Sasha has sort of trained up to become these great rebellion to go against Andreas. Sasha's got a killer new look now, which we stan a queen. I'd say overall, I really have been enjoying Sasha's development. I really enjoyed her in season 1 as more of that antagonist, and then her progression through her character arc with seasons 2, and now leading up to the final half of season 3 with her fully realizing that her behavior and actions in the past were not well, and she's trying to change that and do better from now on. And you can really see that with the way that the residents of Wartwood have learned to trust her as well, and she's kind of taken them all under and trained them in order to fight against Andreas there. So she's really gone from being sort of a tiny little manipulative dictator of her own on a high school level to really learning what it means to be a really great leader. And I think that's pretty cool for her. I mean, even Anne points out, because when Anne first returns, Sasha tries to put Anne back in charge because Sasha thinks that is the way that she can make things right, is by letting Anne take the lead. But Anne's never really been the ruler kind of person. She's never quite been the leader. We've seen the few times that she would try leading things in the past couple of seasons, it never really worked out too well. And at this point, Anne fully realizes that. So there was an episode where Sasha tried to put Anne in charge of the whole rebellion, and Anne tried for a little bit, and everyone, including Anne, is like, look, Sasha, this is the role you're made to do, you know? Anne's great, we love Anne, but she's not our leader. She's more of the heart, the center of why we're here. She's the reason, but Sasha is the one that is able to train everyone and lead them into potential victory. It's nice because we see that change in the dynamic between Anne and Sasha, because Anne is her own person now. She's not just following along blindly to Sasha's directions. At the same time, Sasha is making sure that she is listening to Anne and what Anne has to say and taking it seriously. So again, we really see the change in that friendship dynamic from the beginning of season 1 all the way up to now. So once again, very, very fun, smooth character arc. And we haven't even gotten to Marcy yet, so I suppose I should talk about Dark Marcy, or Darcy, as we have coined her before they officially made it canon in the show. And since the second half of season 3 is all about building up to this grand series finale, we get a lot of characters that we've met along the way within the past 2 seasons of Amphibia joining up for the rebellion. We've got Anne's Domino 2 Mothbug cat, which she rescues in a la kind of How to Train Your Dragon form. We've got that Newt that looks like Inigo Montoya and his little band that he's created with sort of a Robin Hood themed episode. We've even got the parasitic mushroom guy creating a midsummer themed thing when they encounter him again, or it, probably more of an it. Fungi don't really have genders. But even the mushroom parasite that we thought was going to potentially become a big bad in a later season actually ends up partnering with the rebellion in Wartwood. So it's really cool to see all of these callbacks to these older characters that we met in season 1, see where they are now, and see how through their interactions with Anne and the Planters has sort of changed them as well. So now this finally accumulates to our grand series finale, where they're going to go up, they're going to try and take down Andreas, but little do our heroes know is Darcy exists now. The core has taken over Marcy's body. We learn a little bit later on that Marcy's kind of trapped within her own mind, so to speak, within the core. And let's just gotta say this, Darcy's animation is so fluid. I love fluid animation. But seriously, just the sleekness of it and the movements of Darcy, because you still have a little bit of Marcy's natural movements in there as well, since it is still technically her body. But you can see the core totally using her clumsiness to their advantage now. So it's really cool to see in a, oh, I can't stand this sort of way. So yeah, we have the whole rebellion of Wartwood and the Toads and the Newts, I forgot to mention that they all come together as well. So it's a nice callback to at the beginning of season 1 where all of these different factions were separated out, Frogs, Toads, and Newts, and now they've all come together, mostly thanks to Anne and her interactions with all of them. And they go up to take down Andreas. They're having the great big battle below, epic fight scenes. And then, of course, our main characters, our main players in the game, Anne, Sasha, the Planters, and Grime, or Sasha, all go to the castle to try and get the music box and rescue Marcy. And then this is when they encounter Darcy, and boy, does it hurt. Darcy knows exactly where to get them, you know. But despite all of that, Anne's still able to kind of play off of them a little bit, because it seems like they're not entirely using all of Marcy's natural intelligence, which I don't know why they wouldn't use that, but from what we understand, they don't really know how the Calamity Box works either. So at the end of the day, nobody actually knows how the Calamity Box works. Which arises to the question, why was it even called the Calamity Box in the first place? Again, another pin in that one, so we'll get back to that when we talk about the hardest thing. Alright, so here we are, we're finally, the series finale, all in, the big, giant episode. The portal's been opened with the music box. Andreas is shoving his takeover army through onto Earth now. Then now it's go time. This is endgame, people. Back in Amphibia, we still have the rest of the residents fighting the frog army robots there. And meanwhile, of course, our main players are now on Earth fighting against Andreas, trying to get the invasion to stop. And on top of that, we found out that Anne's parents have been very busy convincing Mr. X and his team to help them out, because now they got like slick new armor. Mr. X is officially kind of on their side, so to speak, since they're the ones trying to keep out the giant dictator from another world to take over Earth. So of course, Mr. X and his team would be like, yeah, we want to help with that. We don't want this guy here. So you have sort of this reunion of people from Amphibia and people from Earth getting together to do this final showdown. I'm a little bit more surprised that we didn't have more of the human characters that we had met on Earth, but I suppose it makes sense since the show's title is Amphibia, and we haven't really gotten to know the human characters as well as we've gotten to know the characters in Amphibia. So it's really nice that on top of just the planters, we also have Grime now, a part of the team, and we also have Olivia and Yunin with us as well. They were under mind control when they first went into the castle, and Anne and Sasha did some epic dance moves in order to free them from that mind control, so now they're here to try and stop Andreas with the rest of them. So it's really nice because, again, we have the Frog, Toad, and Newt sides all coming together again. So it's nice to see that balance of the Frog, Toads, and Newts having all of them in the human world fighting on top of all the ones in Amphibia fighting as well. So now we're all accumulating to the grand showdown, and I realize now that I forgot to mention this earlier. Maybe if I actually finalized the script I had instead of going off and saying whatever I wanted, then it would have been more pieced together, but whatever. So during the Rebellion episodes, before the grand showdown, the planters discover sort of this secret area underneath their house, like a secret ancestral area that they hadn't noticed, because if you remember from season 1, the planters' home has like all of their ancestral history buried underneath the ground. And underneath their home, not only is there like this huge bunker area where Sasha and Grime have been making the rebellion, but they also happen to discover this small room that they had never found before with a red piece of paper in it with supposedly nothing on it. Of course, we know there's probably something on it, it's just hidden. And they never say it directly, but we learned that this was Leaf, which was one of Andreas's old friends back when he was younger. He was friends with a frog and a toad. They parted ways. Leaf was the one that he thought betrayed him because she discovered that them using the music box to take over other worlds, it wasn't, it wasn't with good intentions, and she was trying to stop Andreas from becoming another loop in the endless cycle of the new hierarchy taking over other worlds. So she took the music box, she hid it on Earth, and then she lived out the rest of her life in Wartwood becoming a planter. So that's pretty cool to see. We always suspected when we first saw Leaf's initial character colors that she was probably related to the planters in some way, since she and Sprig have exactly the same color scheme. So it's really nice to see that there is that connection, that Leaf is in fact a planter ancestor. So with all of that being said, we've got the grand battle. Sasha and Grime go back up into the castle, so they're facing off against Darcy. And meanwhile, you got Anne doing another showdown against Andreas. Andreas. And this time, Andreas is trying to come fully prepared. He's got some crazy armor. He's got like the ancient, I forget what it's called, but it's a prehistoric salamander amphibious creature. So Anne and Andreas are having their big showdown, and on top of that, we actually see the herons that had killed Sprig and Polly's parents. So the planters even have sort of their own final showdown, taking control and defeating these herons and getting rid of the mind collars on them, and eventually kind of training the herons. So that's a mini arc going on with the planters, and then of course you have the big showdowns between Sasha, Grime, and Darcy, and then Anne and Andreas. And they all, again, the fighting scenes are so good, so good. Like, between the two, it's hard to choose because I really love it when Anne uses her calamity power. She's gotten a lot better at it as the season has gone on. So seeing her use sort of more of her practice with her calamity powers against Andreas, who is now coming in fully aware that she still has those powers and is trying his best to combat that, is really neat. But in terms of battle-wise, I'm going to have to give, like, best battle of All In to Sasha and Darcy. Their battle is not only epic, not only is it nail-biting because it's completing Sasha's character arc and shows how much she has changed as a person, but also Darcy's animation movements, again, are totally sick. Look at that. Just the sight, so fluid, so cool. And when we first heard that a character was going to lose an arm, we speculated that it was going to be Anne. And it turned out, nah, it wasn't Anne. It was Grime. Grime lost his arm, but he doesn't seem too torn up about it, so, you know. Which does technically make sense, because if an amphibian does lose an arm, they just kind of kill off the nerve endings. It's not that big of a deal to them. So you have the grand battles sort of dueling alongside each other, very fluid transition movements in between the two battles. Sasha does eventually defeat Darcy by cutting off the tube that was connecting the core helmet to the rest of the castle. So therefore that frees Marcy. And then on top of that, the accumulation of Anne and Andreas's battle is Sprig ends up in the middle of it and shows Andreas the letter that Leaf had written to him. And that makes Andreas reflect back on all of his actions, realize what was going on, what he has done, because Andreas's goal was just to be a part of the core, because the core was the history of his family. And basically, each ruler of Amphibia would just become a part of this core and live on for eternity. So Andreas always felt like he had to live up to that expectation. And hearing Leaf's letter, something inside of him snaps, and he looks tired, like, I've never really wanted to do this. I've just been trying to please somebody else, and I'm done. I'm done doing it. So as Anne's about to put in a blow, expecting him to fight back, he surrenders, and she just rips right through him. You can see the last second panic in her eyes, realizing he's not going to fight back, where she's like, oh no, it's too late, I can't turn around, and it just goes that's the only way I could describe that scene. Really, really cool, really powerful. And then Andreas is just completely annihilated, and he's got like the Darth Vader thing going on, where he's more machine now than amphibian. It doesn't quite sound the same like that. So with Andreas officially defeated, everyone else goes up to witness that Sasha has managed to free Marcy. It's a bit of a somber moment as they're not sure if Marcy made it, but it gets over pretty quickly when Marcy wakes up. Oh, there! I haven't even talked about Marcy battling in the midst of all of this. That's right, Marcy's not being complacent throughout all of this. While she is inside the core is trying to give her, her dream, her fantasy, being with Sasha and Anne forever, living in a fantasy world. But at this point, Marcy's realized that not only is that not realistic, but you can't hold on to the past. So her sort of arc, which again, it's not really as explicit or as detailed as Anne and Sasha's got to be, since we only really met Marcy through the second half of season 2 up to now. But hers is still pretty decent. It's just not as in-depth as Anne and Sasha's are. But Marcy does realize the error of her ways as well, in realizing she can't hold on to what used to be if things are changing. And boy, is that a hard lesson to learn. Like, change sucks. Even when it's a change that you think you want, it still sucks, because when you're going through it, you're not really realizing what you might be leaving behind sometimes, and then the moment you look back and realize it's never going to be like that again, it's very melancholy. So to see Marcy realize that she can't keep holding on to something that really wasn't that healthy to begin with, and the fact that just trying to hold on to it would only be losing these friendships she has with Sasha and Anne instead of preserving them. So she learns that she needs to finally let go and accept change when it happens, and that in turn helps her fight the core right as Sasha's getting rid of the core from her physically. So that's sort of Marcy's little arc there. Hooray, everyone's alive, you know, a few limbs lost here or there, but no harm done. Nobody's like off. We don't have any warning like we did with True Colors. I'm still not sure now why they put up that warning, considering this finale was just as brutal, but no warning there. Okay, so they shove Andreas's army back through into Amphibia, closing off the portal. Earth is protected, Earth is saved. We're left to make our own decisions and destroy ourselves instead of letting another world do it for us. And you know, it's a big ceremony, everyone's celebrating, and then right at the very end of All In, Sprig notices that the moon, the red moon that's been in the background of every episode, it's been in the background of the end credits, is suddenly getting closer, a la Majora's Mask. And when I first watched All In, it was really late at night because I had finished up work, and then I came home and watched it, and then I went to bed, and I had a legit nightmare about that moon. I haven't had nightmares in a long time, but for some reason that image really stuck in my brain during that particular night. So yeah, it was a somewhat haunting image. So this leads us into the hardest thing, the final episode of Amphibia. And I'm going to take out that pin of what the Calamity Box is, because the hardest thing addresses that on top of the big final battle. There's always been speculation about why the Calamity Box is called the Calamity Box. I had speculations as well, and especially when Anne had gotten her Calamity powers, she mentioned how she never felt quite right using them. So it always gave us the sense that maybe the power was initially malignant, that it was initially evil, and that the moon was the Calamity Box's doing. But it turned out to be a lot more nuanced than that, which I appreciate, because despite being a cartoon show about being in a world where frogs are walking and talking, it's surprisingly grounded in a lot of realistic concepts. So the Calamity Box is basically this untapped potential power. The stones themselves are that power. They were put down on Amphibia just to see what would happen to them. And then, at least my personal speculation is that Andreas's family discovered these stones. They put together the music box, learned that, you know, with the power of the stones, they could transport themselves to other worlds, and that began their grand conquest. So the box itself is the calamity part, because again, the purpose of Andreas and his ancestors using the box was to take over other dimensions and other worlds. But the stones and the power itself isn't inherently evil, but it's not inherently good either. It all depends on the user. You know, with great power comes great responsibility and all that stuff. You know the drill. So the moon is actually the core taking it over. It gets out of the castle, the little helmet, it takes over the moon, which apparently was a last resort fail-safe in case for some reason everything else failed for it. And we kind of learned that basically the core's intentions are just to survive, no matter what that takes. Because Marcy says it because, again, she's been a part of the core, so she sort of understands what they're doing, because it is technically her at her absolute worst, trying to keep things the way they are, trying to always be in control of your situation. The core's last resort is just to nix the whole thing, just get rid of it all, nuke Amphibia. So Anne, Sasha, and Marcy, finally all three get the calamity powers in order to do the final battle to stop the core, but at the risk that they might not be able to go back to their world. But at this point, the three of them, they're willing to take that risk. It's not even, you know, a think about it moment. Just immediately they're like, no, this is what we gotta do. We need to protect our friends here in Amphibia. We don't care, we're doing it. Now, while I prefer the Sasha-Darcy battle more, this climax is still very epic because we have been chomping at the bit to see all three girls use these calamity powers. So to finally see it all accumulate in a very like Powerpuff Girls anime climax sort of way, Super cool. I mean, Marcy said it herself. It's the most anime thing that's ever happened to her. You know, it speaks for itself. There's not really much more I can say about this final big climax where all three girls are using the powers, because it is very cool. Once again, animation, beautiful. But despite all of that, it isn't quite enough, because Sasha and Marcy haven't used and learned to use the power as much as Anne has. So they start to drain down over time, they get tired, and Anne goes to the final failsafe that Mother Olm told her about. Mother Olm is like this giant axolotl creature. I forgot to mention Mother Olm, didn't I? But anyway, Anne knows that there is another way that someone can potentially take on all three of the calamity powers, but it will destroy the person in the process. So again, that could also be where the calamity part comes from, and the fact that if you attempt using all three, you will literally be destroyed. But Anne does it anyway. She safely sends Sasha and Marcy back onto the ground in Amphibia. Sprig comes up to try and convince her not to do it. They have a very teary-eyed moment, and then Anne takes on all the power, annihilates the core, and then she turns into like a bunch of dusty leaves and floats up into the air. Very sad, but again, since this is a series finale, we know it's not going to stay like that. So Anne is in, like, I'm not even sure, it's like some sort of limbo slash, it's like a multiverse limbo. And she ends up talking to the creator of the stones, which is this all-powerful multiverse ruling being, which again sent the stones down to Amphibia to see how they would be used. And apparently Anne was really the only one who tried to use her calamity power for good, after hundreds of thousands of years. So the deity tries convincing her to take the deity's position, and Anne goes, I'm only 13. Do you know how many times I messed up? Like, I didn't even lead the rebellion. Sasha did. You want to put me in charge of the multiverse? I don't think so. Again, the deity is pretty impressed with Anne's very mature answer of not wanting to take the power. It does remind me a little bit about Percy Jackson. Oh boy, I'm very much looking forward to that series coming out on Disney+. So the deity accepts that Anne won't take over the position, and pleasantly surprised at the answer that she gave, the deity does send her back to live out her life on Earth or in Amphibia, with the suggestion that when she turns 91, she'll pass away and then become the deity. But again, who knows if that would have actually happened. That was, you know, it was kind of a little, wait, what? What did you just say sort of moment? But it's cool to think that even though Anne turned it down, there's still the possibility that she could potentially become this multiverse deity in the future. Oh man, I'm out of tea. So Anne is alive, and the deity leaves 3 small shards remaining of the Calamity Stones left, just enough for Anne, Sasha, and Marcy to get back to their world. However, they can never return to Amphibia. So we have lots of heartfelt, teary goodbyes between our 3 girls and the friends that they've made along the way. Obviously, Anne's with the Planters is a lot more in-depth, very emotional. Her goodbye to Sprig is just absolutely heartbreaking, tear-breaking. It's just a wonderful moment there. And then all 3 girls do return to Earth. And then we get a time skip. So we get to see what happens as time changes, because again, Amphibia's big theme has been about how things change and about how to adapt with that change and accept it. So now we see Wartwood in the future. We got a fully grown-up Polly, at least kid grown-up Polly. She's no longer a pollywog. She's a big girl frog. And we also get to see an older Sprig, an older Ivy, and we get to see that the frogs, toads, and newts are still all kind of communicating with each other and being partners instead of being these different factions. All the characters that we've kind of met along the way all get together in Wartwood for this big unveiling of this statue of Anne. Sprig still very much misses his friend, but as Anne mentioned in their goodbye, they'll never truly be apart as long as they remember each other and the bond that they shared. And then from there, Sprig and Ivy are like off to do some grand adventures, off to explore new reaches of Amphibia that have never been seen before, leaving potential for maybe if the story wanted to be continued, it could lead into sort of that where Sprig and Ivy are going off and exploring these new areas of Amphibia that they didn't know about before. And back in the human world, we get to see our girls all grown up and they have parted ways, but they all are coming together for this one moment for Anne's birthday, which is very nice to see that even though they had gone their separate ways, they still do come together to remember their time in Amphibia and remember what had made them friends so many years ago. So we see Marcy, who's become a webcomic artist. We have Sasha, who's now become a guidance counselor for kids, which is very neat. Again, Sasha's character arc is arguably one of the best ones in the show. And then to see Anne working with frogs in the human world, teaching kids about them and the public about them. And even having a tiny little pink frog that she named Sprig, having a whole exhibit space that is designed based after her time in Amphibia to show that she will never truly leave Amphibia, that she will always be connected to the place and Sprig in particular. Once again, Spran against the world. So it's a very, very touching finale and a very strong finale. I don't think I've seen a finale of a cartoon this strong since Gravity Falls, honestly. You know, looking back and remembering when they first announced Amphibia and the Owl House, at the time I was really much more excited for the Owl House. But Amphibia was very pleasantly surprising. It had a lot of great moments, a lot of solid characters. It had a lot of really intense life lessons about change and relationships and friendships and how they alter as time goes on top of being just a really fun and entertaining show. You know, I should have expected that any person that worked on Gravity Falls was just going to go out and make a banger. I should have just known that from the start. And Matt Brawley and his team, boy, did they put together something special. Amphibia went from the show that I kind of saw and went, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, I'll probably watch it for fun, to a show that I was actually thoroughly invested in. And again, the finale just brings it all together so nicely. It completes all of their arcs. It shows the progression. It continues on with the overall theme that the show had been accumulating to the whole time. And it's just a very clean, solid ending, which again, it's not something we've had from a show in a while. The other shows that I've covered on this channel, you know, we've had shows that have just been flat out canceled, like Infinity Trains. Or we have shows where as the seasons went on, it seemed like there wasn't necessarily a plan, you know, they were just kind of making it up as they went along. And then when you would watch the entirety of the show as a whole, it would make the whole experience just kind of muddy. But Amphibia was never like that. Even as it changed from season to season, it always felt like the show that we had in that very first season. So the consistency, the themes, the characters, all carried throughout the 3 seasons. And that was basically Amphibia. It's still hard to wrap my head around that was it. We have the whole show now. But for what we have and for as short of a time as it felt that we got it, it's a really solid show. And luckily we still have a few more episodes of the Owl House left. So we still have that to kind of push our way through, and then I feel like once the Owl House ends, then it'll really hit that sort of this era of cartoons is over. Which is a weird thing to think about, but again, the whole theme of Amphibia was change and embracing that change, and the final ending of the show is very much that send-off, not only for the characters, but to the fans that have enjoyed the show as well, and the team, that nothing ever stays the same, but the most you can do is accept the change, embrace it, adapt with it, but also look back on the times that you had and appreciate what that was. So there you have it, my whole finale talking about Amphibia there. So hopefully my plan is I won't discuss the owl house until we kind of have all of that accumulate together as well. It's more for time stuff. I'm just really busy with the things I actually get paid to do now. But I still want to make sure that I wrap up discussing Amphibia and Owl House, since back when I had more free time, I was really cranking out the content there. So I want to make sure it all, it completes itself. Because I'm very much, I'm that kind of person that enjoys it when things complete themselves. So with that being said, I really hope you enjoyed today's Cartoon Corner. Get enough Kleenex boxes to wipe those tears off from Amphibia, because remember, there is still Owl House to cry about. In that case, maybe go to the store and get more Kleenex. And with all that being said, standard YouTube protocol, blah, 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 like button, bell icon, subscribe, whatever else. Oh, but speaking of change, if you noticed, a few months ago, actually it was last month now that I think about it, last month we had announced that there is a second channel now. So once I am done talking about the Owl House, all of the cartoon related content is going to go onto that second channel. I'm not going to delete any videos that I have here or move any of them. So what is here you can still enjoy. But in the future, once the Owl House Amphibia saga, that timeline has completed itself, any other future cartoon related things I'll talk about will end up being on that second channel. And again, it's just mostly to kind of separate out more of the little kid friendly content from the young adult, older adult content. So that way, it's clean cut, sort of. With all that being said, I sincerely hope you enjoyed it, and I'll probably see you next time when the Owl House brings us all the tears. Yay!